What you can see here is the nuclear-powered USS Minnesota training off Guam. It's a forerunner to the Virginia-class submarines that Canberra plans to buy from the US in the 2030s under the Aukus security partnership. But could Aukus hang in the balance after Elbridge Colby, Trump's nominee for Undersecretary of Defense Policy, said on March 4th the deal could leave US sailors, quote, vulnerable in a Taiwan crisis? Watch this.
Our attack submarines, as you know well, Senator, are absolutely essential for making the defense of Taiwan or otherwise a viable and practical option, to my conversation with Senator Cotton. So if we can produce the attack submarines in sufficient number and sufficient speed, then great. But if we can't, that becomes a very difficult problem because we don't want our servicemen and women to be in a weaker position and more vulnerable, and God forbid worse, because they're not in the right place in the right time.
Where does this leave the Australia-US security relationship? Should Taiwan feel more reassured? And what does China make of this? This is Taiwan Talks. I'm Min Kavat. Joining us today are Chenlung Kuo, United Daily News Deputy Editor-in-Chief, and Chiew-Ping, East Asian International Relations Caucus co-founder. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. In February this year, Canberra made its first down payment of $500 million under the $368 billion Aukus agreement to supply Australia with nuclear-powered submarines. It coincided with the first meeting between Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles and US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, the first meeting Hegseth held with any foreign counterpart. In it, he reassured Marles that President Donald Trump supports the deal. And yet, Australian media were quick to jump on this during Trump's meeting with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Take a look.
We discussed AUKUS, though. We've been discussing AUKUS with the Australians and the Brits. Will you discussing AUKUS with the Prime Minister, sir?
What does that mean?
AUKUS, the Australia-US Defence Alliance.
Yeah, well, we'll be discussing that. We've had another great relationship, and you have too, with Australia.
Yeah.
We've had a very good relationship with Australia.
Chenlung, so this was the first public mention by Trump of AUKUS. He didn't recognise the term at first. Are we reading too much into that? And also, to what extent do Colby's remarks reflect the Trump administration's?
I think President Trump can be excused for not understanding such a complicated deal as AUKUS. But I think what Colby has said is very important because he is not a great supporter of AUKUS when he was not still a civilian. Now he is going to be confirmed as the number 3 person in the Pentagon. He still had doubt about this idea, saying that the submarine, the nuclear power attack submarine the US is going to build for Australia is not going to be at the right place at the right time when the US is needing that.
But my question was, does it reflect the Trump administration's?
It's still too early to say because this would have a lot to do with how much the US shipbuilding industry can be supported by the first down payment you just mentioned. Nowadays, it's about half of the speed of the shipbuilding as it like before the COVID. So what Colby is saying is that he had concern whether the US shipbuilding industry would be up to date and to be fast enough in order to produce the submarine can be good for the US Navy as well as for Australian Navy. If one had to be sacrificed, it's going to be Australian Navy is going to be sacrificed.
Professor Hu, do you agree with that it's just too early to tell, or have there been signals from, say, Rubio, Hegseth about their position on AUKUS? And also, if you can address what Chenlung just said, he said that he thought that it was excusable for Trump to not recognise AUKUS. However, it is a huge boost, isn't it, to the US shipbuilding submarine industry, $368 billion by a single country.
We have to remember that Australia is a treaty ally of the United States. So given how important is Australia to US Indo-Pacific strategy, so there is no way that AUKUS would be cancelled altogether. And moreover, AUKUS is actually a military technology cooperation agreement. So with that, with the recent visit of USS Missouri to the Western Australian Navy base,
Minnesota.
Yeah, Minnesota, sorry. So it's actually a telltale of how they are implementing the Aukus agreement, because that visit is part of the Aukus Pillar 1 Phase 2 implementation.
So you saw that footage that we played at the top of the show. That was obviously, the US Navy inviting media onto that submarine. You saw that as definitive evidence that the Trump administration will not do a U-turn.
Yes, indeed. So what Colby has said, because he is a nominee to be the head of policy at Pentagon, so that's why we are quite concerned whether if his nomination is confirmed, would that have impact on the AUKUS implementation, for example. So I think in terms of delivery of the nuclear attack submarine, we also need to take into account of how within Australia itself, they are also having a debate of whether they should continue the AUKUS acquisition, and there are already voices following Colby's statement that they should also shift or change the agreement to work together with France, for example.
So, also in February, the Congressional Research Service released a report stating that the US Navy aims to have 66 attack submarines, but currently has only 44 to meet its own needs while supplying submarines to Australia. Under AUKUS, the US needs to build 2.3 submarines per year. However, since 2022, the US has only managed to produce an average of 1.2 submarines annually. Also, under that report, there was a proposal that the US would not sell any submarines to Australia. Instead, it would sell its own submarines under US command out of Australian bases, and Australia would instead invest that money in non-submarine military capabilities, such as long-range missiles, drones, or bombers. So what do you make of this proposal, Ton?
I think Colby is trying to say is that maybe the ship will still be built, but it will be operate under the US Navy. It's not going to be transferred to Australia. And Australia can use the money to develop other kinds of facility, like long-range missiles and other facility. And the British is still going to build the AUKUS USSN for SSN, nuclear attack submarine for Australia, but that will come a later day. What Australia is very concerned is there's a gap for its Collins-class submarine to retire without sufficient submarine to take its place. The U.S. suggesting that we can send our submarine over there, but that created a division. I mean, now the submarine is under the U.S. command, that Australia will be losing its sovereignty, and how can Australia be counted on the U.S. defense in that sense? So there's a debate in Australia right now to see if the AUKUS is really suited for Australian need or not.
Right. And so, Professor Hu, if the Australians are unhappy with that arrangement, as Chenlung just pointed out, it's all very well saying, Australia, we will send our US submarines there, you needn't worry. But that means that you're reliant on the US Navy and reliant on the Trump administration. So are you also picking up on the concerns from Australia if this kind of arrangement were to go ahead?
So actually, I believe the current Australian government and its future government will continue to stick to the AUKUS arrangement, because it is very important for Australia to have their own submarine fleet. So they are trying to replace their current aging fleets of submarine, which is diesel fuel. So it is actually very vital to their deterrence. So Australia is a continent on its own. They need their own concentrate deterrence, for example. So it is either whether US would deliver the nuclear attack submarine to Australia or not, they have to acquire their own submarine capabilities.
So you believe that they may perhaps go to France for that?
Well, actually, AUKUS will continue. So the current defense establishment in Australia strongly believe in that.
Okay. Now, under Australia's most expensive defence agreement, Australia is set to purchase 3 to 5 Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarines from the US in the 2030s. Then by the 2050s, Australia and the UK will develop a new nuclear submarine. According to Australian officials, 50 to 80 US Navy personnel will arrive over the next few months to Western Australia's HMAS Stirling base, which is undergoing a $5 billion upgrade to prepare for the nuclear-powered submarines. By 2027, those numbers will expand to hundreds of US Navy personnel and support crew. Let's listen again to Elbridge Colby's confirmation hearing.
I think we should be putting the military capabilities, especially that are relevant in the priority area, ships, submarines, missile defense assets, have to be focused on deterring a conflict over Taiwan. And if, God forbid, it happens, giving our soldiers and sailors and airmen and defenders and Marines the best shot.
So, Chenlung, it's never been explicit, but has AUKUS always been about, allowing, enabling Australia against China in support of the US, and therefore in support of the US in the Taiwan crisis?
That's not been openly said, but it's always the main concern for Australia, extended deterrence, because if it's traditional power submarine, once they reach the sea around Taiwan Island, it would be like there's only less than a week for them to operate. If it's a nuclear power, it can operate indefinitely over there. So that is one of the main concerns for replacing the old Collins class with the nuclear power attack submarine.
And Professor Hu, how do we assess into the mix Colby's comments? I mean, you seem to be thinking that it won't actually have an impact. You said that AUKUS will continue, is that correct? So you believe that the US will deliver the nuclear power, the Virginia-class submarines in the 2030s? Okay, maybe I should address this to Chenlung then. So my question is, what has changed, Chenlung? Have the facts on the ground changed? Why is Colby saying this now when, in such an extensive, expensive deal, they would have done the forecasts and the calculations?
I think they have changed on both sides of the calculation. On the Australian side, they don't have enough confidence in the current Trump administration as before in the Biden years. Just like every country nowadays, the European countries have no confidence in Trump's security commitment. So is Asian countries. That is including Australia. And I think also from the American side, they are finding their shipbuilding capability have been greatly downgraded over the years.
But that hasn't just happened in the last year, has it?
It happened dramatically during the COVID period. And that is not put into calculation when they first started the AUKUS deal. And now we are seeing there's a lot of subcontracting to the Japanese or the Korean shipbuilding company. But still, manufacturing a nuclear power submarine, that's a different thing. And now I think the speed of building a nuclear submarine had been slowed down to about half of the speed like before. So now the US is short of its own nuclear fleet right now. It's about a quarter of short. So they have to make up the differences. That's the reason why Colby is saying that maybe we cannot find a way to provide you, Australia, with the promised nuclear attack submarine as before.
So, Professor Hu, I want you to respond to those comments. So that calculation, the shipbuilding decline on the US side, was not factored in. Should it not be factored in now? Or do you disagree?
Well, I think the US still needs Australia to maintain a very strong presence in the Indo-Pacific. So Sterling Naval Base actually is closer to South China Sea, Pacific Ocean, and Taiwan. It's closer than Guam, for example. So why Australia willing to cancel a deal with France over their conventional submarine capability for a nuclear attack submarine is because nuclear submarine can stay longer, almost indefinitely under the water. It also have that stealth capability, of which I think China is very wary about. So,
but if there is a choice, which is how Chenlung put it, and also Colby puts it, isn't the choice to arm the US Navy rather than the Australian Navy?
I've read about how within Australia, when they were considering which nuclear propelled submarine they should go for, Japan was pop up as one of the options, but yet they did not go for it because the technology is not yet mature. Japan never export that technology to any other countries for their own use. And there is also a controversy about nuclear use in Japan as well, and in Australia actually. So the fact that they forego France, the cooperation with France, and went ahead with Aukus is actually a very critical and crucial decision for Australia.
It was also a different Prime Minister, though, rather than being the same Prime Minister.
Yes, and we expect that the current Prime Minister will actually probably cancel the deal, but he did not, and he actually went ahead with the deal.
Tonglun, if I could come back to Taiwan, so I wanted to get your understanding in Taiwan. So given all the lack of clarity over Trump's intentions with Taiwan's security that we in Taiwan have been feeling, what has been the impact of Colby's remarks about Taiwan defense?
One of the shock Colby's talk during the Congress hearing is that he said that Taiwan should raise its defense expenditure to 10% of GDP. Like he said about Australia, saying that Australia should keep up with the NATO standard, which is 3% of GDP. Now Australia is barely over 2%.
Which Taiwan is at.
Right. Now Australia only barely over 2%. So this is something that is quite a tremendous shock for Taiwan.
Right, but what I'm actually referring to is that he is talking about the US helping in Taiwan's defense.
Right.
Does that not change the dial slightly? Before his comments, there was no talk about this actually happening or the planning of it from Trump officials.
Mr. Colby is one of the officials that we call it among different factions within the Trump administration. It's called prioritizers, meaning that this group of people want to focus on Taiwan and Asia defense more than what's happening in Europe. They want to concentrate the resources back in Indo-Pacific areas. I think Colby had elaborated very clearly during his hearing confirmations about how the neighboring countries should collaborate together to come to Taiwan defense if something happened.
So you don't think that with his position, a future position, coupled with, what we know to be Hegseth's position, Mike Waltz's position, so this doesn't change anything for Taiwanese?
But it's still up to the president who make the final decisions. We are still looking at what kind of so-called deal that President Trump is going to make in the future summit between the U.S. president and the Chinese president. And that is a political decision that would transcend or even outwin the military calculation.
Absolutely. And also, as you pointed out, Colby talked about Taiwan coming to the table with 10% of GDP on defense spending. So Colby's remarks about AUKUS come at a sensitive time for Australia. Australian military has remained on high alert since late February after it was almost entirely circumnavigated by a Chinese warship task force. During that journey, Beijing held unannounced live-fire drills in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. This was the farthest south such activity was recorded by the Chinese Navy. Now, just last week, Australia announced plans to acquire long-range anti-ship missiles to be fired from mobile launches. One type of missile could have a 1,000-kilometre range and be paired with the 42 high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, on order from the US. Professor Hu, let me ask you, so how worried do you sense Australia is now, and what kind of threat does China pose to Australia itself?
So together with New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand and US, the UNZUS Treaty is what makes them having this converged security concerns for the longest time. So for both Australia and New Zealand right now, they are highly concerned about China's action in the Pacific Islands. So for example, China's actions in the Solomon Islands and most recently deep sea mining near Cook Islands, for example. So these have ignite concern. And what more with this latest Tasman Sea naval drill done by Chinese Navy security. So Australia is even more pressing for Australia to continue to strengthen their defense capability together with the US and allies.
So what I'm reading from you is you're talking about the threat or the influence building in the Pacific Islands.
Absolutely.
How about to Australia itself?
Well, because Australia is very conscious about their inability to having effective deterrence surrounding the entire Australian continent. So the reason for the submarine acquisition is to have effective deterrence surrounding Australia itself. So the earlier discussion about Taiwan is that it's a bit far-fetched for Australia to think about that right now, unless and until they have a sufficient submarine fleet that can protect and also assure safety for themselves before they can move northward or eastward, westward.
Chenlung, let's think about if the nuclear-powered submarine component is ditched on Aukus, what happens to the US-Australia security relationship? Does it have an impact?
I don't think it will really ditch. There's a contingent plan already coming from Washington, meaning that...
No, but if they don't transfer those submarines to Australia...
The submarine is still going to be built, but it's going to be operated under the U.S. Navy. There's going to be a fleet of submarine going to base in Australia and serve as the security guarantee. Just like the Chinese fleet, when they are sailing outside the Australian continent, actually the U.S. nuclear submarine has sailed out to follow them in that case. It's rumored that except the 3 surface ships, there's also 1 Chinese submarine tail beneath this fleet. So that is quite an assuring thing that the U.S. want to put out to Australia, saying that no matter what, we're going to still guarantee your security.
Okay. And Professor Hu, we know that China has railed against AUKUS. They've called, this transfer of the nuclear-powered, we must stress that, nuclear-powered, not nuclear-armed submarines. They've labelled it nuclear proliferation. And what we understand is that Australia would not be able to access the nuclear technology at all under this deal. So how would China interpret it if it's different to the scenario that you predict, and that it goes along more what the Congressional Research Service said, which is, the Americans keep the nuclear submarines, but they are operated out of Australia. Would China be happier with that?
Of course not, because China is always wary about U.S. military presence in the region. So U.S. military footprint, especially along the first island chain and now extending into Malaysian waters as well, has been a great concern for China. So the Tasman Sea and China's opposition against AUKUS actually falls very well within their expectation of testing the red line by Australia and New Zealand as well, because the position in which they held the Navy drill is within the so-called international waters, even though they are within the exclusive economic zones of Australia.
Okay. Former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has warned Australians to stop kidding themselves. They are special when it comes to Trump 2.0. It reflects across the region US allies feeling unsettled by Trump's tariffs, his realigning of the global order, especially in relation to Russia, and questions over the new administration's commitment to their alliances. So, Professor Hu, let me come to you. So Trump's administration has said very clearly it's withdrawing from Europe to focus on China. So why are Asia-Pacific allies so wary?
I think after what went down in the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump and J.D. Vance, they are great concern whether those allies in Asia will be abandoned. And also how Trump has treated Canada, for example, declaring it as the 51st state of the United States and calling their prime minister governor.
But none of that is in Asia.
Well, there is a concern that Australia would become the 52nd state of the United States, but I think that wouldn't went down that way with Australia especially. So, but then again, that prompt concern for some in Australia as well, that they may be passed on or abandoned by the U.S. and they have to, and also there is a tariff on the steel and aluminium in Australia from the United States. So there is economic and also military concerns.
Chenlung, can the U.S., can it counter China in Asia without the help of its allies?
I don't think that would be possible. Just like Professor Hu had mentioned, Australia was hoping that Trump can get a special exemption out of Trump for its steel and aluminum tariff. But it did not get it. So this is a way of saying that Trump is treating its allies and friends alike, and they are even treating its allies even more harshly than its enemy. And there's another concern is that we may be going back to the Yalta years, that Trump is going to divide up the world according to sphere of influence with Russia and with China. And that is the concern both in Europe and in Asia.
We're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for joining Taiwan Talks today, Chenlung Kuo and Chiew-Ping. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.